Hello everybody, my name is Jim Bender. Today I'd like to show you guys how to solder 4 different types of connectors to a couple different types of cables. But before we begin that, there's one thing I'd like to go through, and it's probably the most important thing of this, is safety. Okay? Number one, you are dealing with a 15-watt soldering iron, which is what this is, a pencil iron. Right? They make soldering guns, all kinds of different types of soldering tools. But this is a basic one. It's about $15. It is one of those things that can burn you. So we have a handle here, and that's not the handle. So don't grab it here, grab it here. You'll appreciate that. Or you'll just need a bunch of ice. But with that said, this is a low wattage type of welding or fusion that we do. So another thing you need to be concerned with is the fact that solder does have the ability to splatter a little bit. So if you're concerned with maybe a little of that getting on your arms, things like that, do wear long sleeves, but that generally is not the case for something like that would happen. However, it is always about safety. I'm currently wearing safety glasses, my prescription glasses, but if you don't wear glasses or you can see a little bit closer without wearing them, a pair of safety goggles would be appropriate. You can get these for about $5, $10 at any hardware supply store. Right? But it's well worth the investment. Got to protect your eyes. Right? Another thing too is that being in a well-ventilated room, the room I'm in right now, wouldn't be any concern. But if you're in the tighter quarters, you definitely want to have some type of exhaust fan, just a small exhaust fan that will take the fumes out of the room. Those are 2 very important safety features, and on any job site, that is actually required. You do want to consider the fact that you have to have a flat surface as best as possible. Here I'm using a desk. So I have this piece of masonite, but particle board, plywood, cardboard, anything like that you can kind of make a mess on. You can see some of my little scorch marks here from earlier projects. You want to make sure that you're not burning up your coffee table. It's never a good idea. But as well as you should consider the floor too, because strands of wire, solder, and things like that can, find their way down to that. So, and sometimes you drop a hot tool and you want to be able to grab it real quick. So with that in mind, just like a moving blanket or an old blanket or something like that on the floor can definitely help in cleanup later on too. Covering all these different tools and stuff, which I'll do it here in a second. There's one main tool that a lot of people don't really think about, right? And it's a sponge, of all things. With that, I'm just going to wet this down real quick, and that sop up the excess water. This is to clean off the soldering tip, because there are components within the solder, one being flux, that will cake or build up on the end of the actual soldering tip here. As I have right now, just a little blob of solder. It's going to clean that off real quick. Now it's very convenient to have a stand, obviously, to hold your soldering iron. Never lay this down on a table or anything like that. Always have some type of surface to put it on. What I have used in the past has been, drink a soft drink, a can of like Coca-Cola or something like that, and just knock out the backwash a little bit. They can put a crease in the center of the soda can, and just lay your iron down in there. Just realize, again, that's hot, so the can will get hot and it can burn, get it? But beyond that, it's about setting up a work surface area where you're comfortable. In this case here, I've also have another critical component in my opinion. They make vice clamps, they make all kinds of jigs that you can use, and that's what this is considered as a jig. But a block of wood, relatively inexpensive. You could probably go to the back of a hardware store and find extra blocks of 2x4 or something, but just ask. But what I've done is just taken some Velcro. You could use duct tape, anything you want, just to create a way to adhere this to the surface, right? That way, when I'm working on a connector, soldering on a connector, I can twist it around like this if I want, as well as if I'm working up in the air, say if I'm soldering a connector to a soffit speaker or something, or a powered speaker up into somebody's studio, I can C-clamp this or clamp this down to a ladder rung, a ladder step, and have my tools on the paint tray and my parts up on top, and now I have a soldering station in the air. Of course, I'm going to need to extend out the electrical cord on the soldering iron, right? So it's just something you might want to tie off the extension cord, and that way you have a little bit of safety involved in that too. But the basics of it, just creating myself a surface area that I can work comfortably with. I also have the ability, as you could probably see here, just to use my Sharpie and write down the connector points. The soldering points are, as we call, the pin outs, right, on these. Another critical tool that you're going to need is a pair of wire strippers, and I'll show you how to use these in a bit. These are called T-strippers. They have predetermined hole sizes within the jaws. When I collapse the jaws like this, predetermined hole sizes that correlate directly to the size of the conductor. It's meant to strip off the insulation, the outside insulation of the conductor, and leaving the strands of wire intact. Right? There are two different types of what we call wire strippers. These are called T-strippers because they go down to the telephone wire gauge size, right, down to 26 gauge. But they go up to 16 gauge as well, right, which is plenty enough for doing soldering audio cables, right, but as well as terminating RJ45 connectors on Ethernet cabling. But they do make electrical wire strippers, and those are just a little bit bigger gauge holes, right? And again, it's just predetermined, you know, to leave the strands of wire intact. They also usually include some cutting jaws, and the nice thing about that, oftentimes you want to start with what's called a butt end of a cable, right? And you just snip it right off, right? Makes a good flat surface, gives you a good place to start with in actually prepping your cable. At the same time, there's a ruler on the handles too. And you know, what we do in the electronic audio side, we're not dealing with anything more than an inch when we strip off the outside insulation of the cable itself, right? So it's a good idea to get a pair of these, right? There are other types, but these are accepted on any job site as well, right? With that, they're probably about $10, $15, not too expensive for what they do. And again, just like with any tool, you can spend more money, right? If you desire, right? Now, another critical part of soldering would be, again, the soldering iron itself. This is a 15-watt soldering iron. It has a little rheostat on the side, basically a temperature control. And so whenever I'm soldering, I always make sure that the iron is not too hot, and you would notice it right away if it wasn't hot enough. But for the most part, if you can just melt a little bit of solder on the end of the tip right there, you're in good shape, right? And I'll come back to that little bit of smoke here that just burned off. But anyway, so 15 bucks for an iron, you know, not too much for what it does. Right? Some other tools that you're probably going to want to get, and one would be simply just some jeweler's screwdrivers. Essentially anything you can work with eyeglasses, you know, any type of screwdriver, you know, get a set of those. They're like $5, $10. If you want to spend more, again, you know, this particular screwdriver by itself is about $5 itself. But it just, again, is how much money you're making with your tools, and is it worth you investing that amount? I usually suggest, yes, do it. You'll need it in the long run. Another thing is, another tool that we use, a pair of needle nose pliers, right? Because after a while, particularly when you're desoldering connectors, you're putting a hot iron, 15 watts, on a piece of metal that will heat up from here to here. So you can be brave or you can be smart. Grab a pair of needle nose, right? Use those to hold the hot parts. You'll appreciate that in the long run as well. One other type of tool that I recommend getting are diagonal cutters. Now they're called diagonal cutters because they do just that. They cut on a diagonal, okay? They do make what are called flush cuts as well. But these are kind of a standard type of tool that you would actually want to purchase. Now these are 4-inch, and it's all about the size of the cable you're going to cut, right? They make them all the way up to 20-inch. If you've ever seen a lineman or if you've ever seen an electrician, they're usually going to have bigger pairs because they're cutting bigger wires. So it's the right tool for the job itself. So cutting a cable like this a few times, hey, that's no big deal. But if I do this over and over and over again, after a while, these jaws will wear out. So you might want to get a bigger pair, or simply, again, use the cutting jaws in the apex of these T-strippers here. It'll work perfect. Right? One of the other things that we deal with as well, again, is the solder. Right? And as you saw previously, that smoke was burning off. That is a liquid that is built within the actual solder itself, and this is 1/16 inch electronic solder. It's called a 6040. That is the actual metals. You must realize there's aluminum, there is nickel, and there is also lead in this too. Right? So it's a very good idea. Always wash your hands, right, after doing soldering. Within that, there's a center channel that is called flux, right? And it's basically the liquid or the fluid that allows the solder to fuse to the metal. A very, very important catalyst that we use in this. So the smoke that was actually burning off, right, was the flux itself. Right? And this is another reason why you want to be in a ventilated room. It's the main reason, in my opinion, because you don't want to be breathing this in continuously. So with the solder that we have here, this is actually meant to fuse connectors to cable. I mean, that's what we use it for. However, you will see electricians, stained glass artisans, plumbers, they will use solder in different ways, but it's all the same process. It, again, is a low wattage type of welding there. So one of the main type of cables that you will actually use in your career is a guitar cable, or an instrument cable sometimes it's called, depending on who you're speaking with. This is a 20-foot cable. This has a nice braided cover on it. It looks really nice. Doesn't really add anything except for a certain look. But moreover, this is what we consider a 1/4-inch connector, right? And that's just the diameter of the connector itself. It's a tip sleeve. There's insulation in between the tip and the sleeve that separates those two connection points from each other. Okay? They do make, when I say they, manufacturers make 1/8-inch and 16th-inch connectors as well. It's just how are you getting in, how are you getting out as far as your audio signal, right? So a connector doesn't change your audio signal at all. What I have here is a smaller version of that, right? And just taking these apart, sometimes it's a little bit of a struggle, but this is important to be curious. So here you go. I'm going to need my needle nose pliers just to hold that shaft of the tip sleeve connector there. So hold that shaft real quick. I have to spin it off a couple times, right? And when it comes loose, you can see this little piece of plastic right here, this clear plastic, and this is great to keep any of the connection points from touching that outer cap. Right? So just separate that from the cable itself, right? And inside, you can now see the signal carrying conductor that's exposed, right, with a little bit of insulation, that red wire. And you have a shield wire that's actually attached to the side or the sleeve connection within that channel right there. This is a good solid built connector right here. With that, you have this black insulation, and this is one of the more critical things. And for you guitar players, singers, you guys have dealt with cables breaking on you in the middle of a show or more likely a show or something, just by stepping on the cable. What happens is that black insulation will actually separate or pull back from these little silver tabs here. These are called strain or stress relief points. And what they do is actually clamp down on the outside insulation, right, to keep the connector attached to the cable itself. So when you have to fix a cable, right, repair a cable, you're going to have to just kind of figure a way to bend those little tabs out. And here I'm just holding with the connector with my hand here, and just bending these little tabs out a little bit, right? And that you want to be careful because it is a metal that does not have a high tensile strength. So you don't want to bend it back and forth, right? Kind of like a hanger. But with that, I can see, okay, now I've exposed the cable. I'm able to actually pry this out a little bit. I don't want to pry it too much, but I can pry this out just a little bit right here. And it allows me, within my jig, right, that I've drilled 2 1/4-inch holes in, right in here, it allows me to just slide that in. It's nice to have something like this that holds my work for me, right? And all jigs work like this, right? Another type of cable that you will see and was included in your laptop package is an XLR cable, right? And there's specific things on an XLR cable, the connectors themselves, I should say. And one is the fact that we have what's considered the female XLR. That's just the one with the holes, and the male XLR, right, the one with the pins. Okay? There are 2-pin to 10-pin XLR connectors. And again, it's not really how many pins there are that you should be concerned with, except for what you're going to connect it to, right? So you need to kind of discover your connectors. Just take a look and see what you got there. Now, taking these apart, it's relatively simple. This is a Nutrix style connector. It's a tightening cap right here that I loosen, right, with fingertips like that. Just slide this down from the cable, right? And then the cable should slide out. Now, sometimes you have to grab your little screwdriver and just press down on the connector to get it to slide out. The little latch right here can bind up the connector and cause that to not come out or pop out easily. So, just a little common sense with that. Just push down with that as you're pulling on the cable, right? So we have our shell. We have our tightening cap, right? We have another type of strain relief here, which actually has a little split that I can pry that off of the cable so I can put it on at any time as well. But this is meant to actually grab the outside insulation of this cable right here too, right? And then I have my connector, right? Three pin, even though it's the female version, a 3-pin XLR, right? There are little teeth marks within this cable right here, okay? And that is a product, right, of the jaws on this strainer leaf, this black strainer leaf right here, right? And there are different lengths of these as well. It just depends on who the manufacturer of the connector is. But a very critical component, right, as I explained earlier about the 1/4-inch tip sleeve connector to keep the cable attached to the connector. So what happens is, when I put this back together, you notice how I was able to just slip that back onto the cable, right? But at the same time, particularly on the female XLR, you'll see this little horseshoe-looking hole, right? And I line that up with this little spring mechanism. And what that is that makes up the part of the XLR connector that you press down, right? That little tab, you press that down, either plug in or unplug the cable. In this case, it would probably be to a microphone, right? We're coming out of the microphone there. So I line those up, and I have these little keys, or these little indices, or indexes, if you will, that line up as well. Well, those, at the same time, right, will mate up with the inside of the actual shell. There's a little groove that slides in, right? So that's all I have to do is just kind of line it up, maybe twist it around a little bit just to get it to fit within that groove, and then press it in. Now, sometimes, again, this does bind up, right? So there's times when you have to just, gently pull the little tab out here, the little latching mechanism out a little bit, and make sure that the connector, in this case the female connector, is flush to the top of the connector, connector shell itself, right? So back to this strainer leaf thing. What happens is when I tighten this cap down, because there's screw threads here as well as here, when I tighten that down, it actually pinches the outside jaws to the outside of this cable right here. And the important part of that is that, if you do have those types of singers, and you will run into them, particularly if you run live sound shows, they like to swing a microphone on the end of the cable. Chances are that little strainer leaf is going to do all the work for you. The idea is, again, that when you tighten it down, it pinches against the outside insulation. Okay? So there's other things we have to consider, right? And that is how much of this outside insulation that we strip back, right? If you strip back too much of this, then there's nothing for that strainer leaf to actually attach to, right? And after a while, the connector will seem loose, and the natural instinct is to tighten it back up. Well, you could just be pinching against the signal-carrying conductors there, and after a while, again, lead singer that likes to spin the microphone cable is going to find that microphone is now a souvenir for the audience. Right? But with that, attaching this back together, this is the mechanics side of this stuff, and it's something you should get used to. So don't be afraid to take your connectors apart. Just, if you want, take a video of how you took it apart and put it back together the same way. Right? They're very simple, and the male XLRs work the same way. Right? So I'll show you how to, I'm going to show you actually how to repair these too, right? That type of cable. Most people call it a mic cable, right? We know it's a balanced cable with 2 XLRs, one male, one female. Right? Just depends on how you're getting in, how you're getting out for the most part. So with the balanced cable here, right, what I've done on my jig is I took a male XLR, just a brand new one, right? Took it apart. See how I popped that out there, right? Just make sure you can find the parts if you drop them. But what I do is I dipped that into some black spray paint. I just sprayed some in a little cap, right? Some black spray paint, and dipped that in there, and then I transferred that over to the piece of wood. I just touched it. And I took an 1/8-inch drill bit, right? And about that far down into the wood, I just drilled some holes. And what that will do for me is hold my 3-pin XLR male connector for me, right? Very convenient to have that. And again, good sturdy surface. I can move this around however I like, right? Now, the diameters on the XLR females will change on you, right? And what I mean by that is with the Nutric XLR, this is a 1/2-inch diameter. So I took a 1/2-inch wood boring spade bit, it's called, right? And I drilled a hole, about 3/4 of an inch down. That way I can slide my XLR female connector in there, okay? There's another company, they're called Switchcraft. And Switchcraft's female XLRs are 5/8 inch. So that's what I did here. I just drilled a 5/8 inch hole, right? Now sometimes that's the only size you have, right? So again, that old saying, working smarter, not harder, right? It's thinking about how am I going to engineer this, right? So I just usually just take a little piece of paper, right? Kind of fold it up here, right? Create a little wedge inside this hole, right? You got to size it up a couple times when you do this, but take a little wedge there and put it in there, and now that should hold my female XLR for me. Kind of jam it down in the hole. That way it's not moving all over when I put a little bit of pressure on it. Right? Convenient little block right here. Right? You'll want this, definitely. That's the basics of, you know, being able to work with the actual equipment, working with those types of connectors as well. Now there's one other type of connector that you're going to run into, right? For balanced signals usually, but as you've learned through the school, you know, sometimes we can use an unbalanced signal down a cable like this. But this is a TRS connector. Now this is the 1/4 inch version. In the studios, oftentimes you'll see the TT connectors, the tiny telephone connectors. This is a product of the phone company as well. Actually, it is called a phone connector, 1/4 inch phone connector. But due to the real estate or the lack of real estate within patch bays, 19-inch patch bays, a different type of connector was developed, and that's the TT, the tiny telephone. The connection points are all the same as what I'm going to show you here. It's just a smaller version of it. Right? So just like with the other 1/4 inch connector, the tip sleeve guitar cable, I just unscrew the cap from the connector, and there's that insulation again. Don't lose that. Right? You want that. And then you got to pry that off. Now, not somebody's proudest work here, however, I will definitely say that if it works, let's have a concert. Right? But this has the 3 different tabs in it too. Similar stuff. You got the tip, you have the ring and the sleeve on the actual shaft here, and they correspond to this tab for the tip, that tab for the ring, and then on the inside here in the center channel is where the shield wire goes, as always. Now in reassembling, it's just as simple as after you've soldered, right? Slide that little plastic piece on, and I don't know if you notice this, but it's kind of binding up a little bit on those 2 tabs. So what I do is I take my needle nose and carefully pry those back together so they don't bind up any longer, but you want to make sure they're not touching because that would be a direct or dead short. And then I can slide that plastic piece over there really, really easily now. And then slide the connector, right, the cap of the connector up, right, and again, in doing this, right, got a complete connector, it's good and solid, you know, right? Give it a little tug, make sure it doesn't come apart. So that's just another type of cable that connector I will show you how to solder here. Okay, so the next thing to do here is prepping the cable. And one thing I can't stress enough in this is always make sure that that tightening cap, right, is on the cable before you even start. Because if you don't do that, you get to going, you get to feeling good about this, and next thing you know, you realize the cap's not on, you've already soldered, so guess what? You have to desolder and do it all over again. And that's never a good thing. Right? So in doing the XLR connector, I'll do a female connector to show you this. This is a portion where, depending on the size of the cable, right? Like if it's a 2-footer, 1-footer, something like that, you're making a small patch cable. Or if you're doing a 20-foot cable, one good habit to get into is just tie a little knot in it, right? That way your cap doesn't slide down. But there's other parts of this too that you'll see when I go to strip the insulation off the conductors, that's a very, very handy thing to do. So I've done that with this little example of an XLR or a balanced cable that I'm going to attach an XLR connector to, and also an unbalanced cable that I'm going to attach a tip sleeve connector. And this is like for you guitar players, this is like a little patch cable going from one box to the next box, right? Your stomp pedals and that. It's always a good idea to put 2 knots in that one, as you'll see. So to start off, one thing that you'll need to know, and it's just a number you keep in your head, right, is 3/4 of an inch. Right? So I take my blue handled T-strippers here, and I'm going to use all the teeth in these jaws right here to strip the insulation off the outside of this cable right here. And it's going to be about 3/4 of an inch. So what I do is I line it up, the butt end right here to the 0-inch mark, and I put my thumb and forefinger to the 3/4 inch mark, about like that. And after a while you can eyeball this, right, if you do enough of them, particularly at one time. But every connector I do, I start slow and I make it perfect, and that way I have my gauge for the rest of the time that I'm doing this. So essentially about 3/4 of an inch like that. I'm going to take all the teeth in these cutting jaws here because they are very sharp, and just ask me how I know. But I'm going to take and score the outside insulation. Now, this is a product, you have to practice this. I could show you a month of Sundays, but you have to practice this side. And so, always plan for that. So your first one's going to be a little bit slow. And what I'm doing is I'm twisting the cable, as you can see it turning there, I'm twisting the cable to score through the outside insulation. If you press too hard, you pinch down too hard like that, you'll have a tendency to cut through the conductors in here, and that's never a good thing. If you press too light, you just start getting frustrated. So there's kind of a balance in that. And again, you always take your first one slow, and all I'm doing is essentially just slicing through that outside insulation. Make a nice cut right there. Okay. Then I grab between the butt end and the score, or the slice in there. I go in between it, and I just pinch down kind of lightly, so I'm putting the jaws into the outside insulation. I hold my cable with my 4 fingers, and I just push on the metal portion with my thumb. Right? That pops right off. Now, as I was saying earlier about the piece of paper as a wedge, sometimes this works too, to be able to wedge that connector in the hole as well. Right? So it just keeps steady for me coming up here. Now with the cable itself, there's 3 components in a balanced cable. One of them is the shield wire. Right? And so what I do is I just kind of flick this around to separate the copper wire, everybody calls it, but it is your shield wire. A very, very important conductor, not just for noise rejection, but at the same time, it is the negative for your phantom power if you're using a condenser microphone or any active device. So what I do is I separate that from all the other conductors. The first thing I do is I just twist it all nice and tight, all the way to the very tip. Right? Right? So your fingers might get a little raw from doing this, but it's worth it. Right? And then in this case here, I have a little bit of aluminum foil, which this means when I see something like that, this is a really good cable here. It has good rejection, right? Noise rejection. But I take that string and I take that tin foil and I just twist it up, just one time around. I'm just trying to create a very stiff surface here, and then I take my diagonal cutters, right, the back end of it right here, and I put it up against the other conductors there so I don't cut them off, and just snip it right off and just discard that. Right? Now I have my red and my white wire exposed, and the common sense type of thing would be red would be for positive, the white would be for the negative. Right? However, different companies have different color coding for the wiring, so you kind of determine which one's which. Now if you're fixing a cable, open the connector on the other end of the wire, on the other end of the cable there, open that up, and just take a look and see what wire they put on what. The shield wire will always go to pin number 1. That's a worldwide standard. However, some people want to put the red on the negative and the white on the positive. So you have to investigate that. And that's a process of just discovering your connector, looking at the little numbers near the pins or the holes in the solder cups. Just look at those little numbers there, and it'll tell you what wire is going where. And then, beautiful thing about this surface is I can take my Sharpie and just make a little circle like it's an XLR connector. In this case, it's going to be a female. So I show that little kind of bump thing right there, which is representing the latch. That's the top of the connector. So when I'm looking at this, I'm actually looking at the back of the connector, not the front side of it. So you have to realize that this is what's going on. Again, with the numbering system, it clears it up for you quite well. As we all know, when you are plugging in a connector into any type of audio equipment, you want that shield wire to go to the ground, the chassis ground. And so I just make that little symbol, chassis ground, right there. Right. And then discover, okay, the whole opposite of that is pin number 2 or the hole number 2, right? Depends if it's male, female connector. But then, okay, that's always going to be the positive, right, on any standard microphone cable or anything of the like. And I'm just going to put the letter R after that, so now I know it's the red wire that goes there. And that does carry the positive side of my audio signal. And then the hole that represents pin number 3, or the actual pin itself on the male XLR, that's what I'm going to put my white wire on, so just put a little W there, right? And that carries the negative side of my audio signal, right? So if I clarify this in the beginning, I'm not having to look at a piece of paper all the time, and after a while, If you do 10 of these in a row, you kind of got it in your head at that point. It's a good idea to have that Sharpie. So at this point here, in prepping the cable, which is what all this is considered, I'm going to strip off just 1/8 of an inch of the outside insulation on this white wire and the red wire here. So I could use my ruler, right, and just size that up real quick and go, okay, from the 0-inch mark, there's about 1/8 of an inch, and what that would be something about like this, about that length. Now this is 22 gauge wire. So on these particular wire strippers, I'm going down to the second hole here, right, that second groove, if you will, and I'm going to place the conductor completely within that groove and pinch down on it and separate or peel back or strip about 1/8 of an inch of that insulation off that conductor. And I'll do the same thing for the white conductor here too, the one for the negative, right? And that's all you need. If you strip back, maybe I'll do a little more here. All right? This is called custom fitting right here. If you strip back too much of that insulation, what you'll end up doing is actually causing that conductor to be exposed. And as you can probably understand, that's never a good thing because it can cause a dead short or a direct short. So we try to avoid that. I only strip off as much insulation as I need to expose to get it to attach to the connector at that point. So this part of the prepping this cable right here, right, there's actually a third process to this, right, aside from getting the outside insulation, twisting up nice and tight that conductor, and I like to do these too, twist them up tight. You'll appreciate that later on. But the other part of this too is actually tinning the conductors here. Right. The idea behind this is like a super glue analogy I like to use. I'm going to put a little bit of super glue on each one of these surfaces. And then on the connector, I'll put just a thin film of super glue on that as well, right, if you think about it. Solder in this case. But I'll put a little bit of there, and then all I have to do is apply heat, and they will fuse together tight, right? And it'll be an industry standard that is used not only for audio, but for NASA, for that matter. All this applies. So the idea is to take some of my solder here, and I have a big roll right here. And it does not take a lot of solder to do this, by the way. All right. So in this case here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this tip, right, after I clean it a little bit. I have a little bit of that flux that's left over. Just clean it off with my sponge real fast. And I'm going to apply the heat to the conductor and give it about, I don't know, a 2,000 count, 1,000, 2,000. And I take the whole assembly down to the solder. And as you can see, that smoke, I don't want to breathe it in, right? But I basically coat all the inside strands of this conductor right here, and just a little bit, because that's all that will be applied to the connector. The rest, if you do it, it's just a waste of solder. The point of twisting the cable is so the solder flows fluidly through the actual conductor itself. Okay? I'll do the same thing for the white one. So by stripping this back only 1/8 of an inch, some of that insulation actually shrinks back because plastic doesn't like heat. Right? Same idea with this red one here too. Just heat it up real quick, take it down to the solder, and these are now all successfully tinned. Right? So it's like having one surface having the super glue on it. Okay, I like to show a little bit of what sometimes not to do. Right? You notice this is almost 1 inch, if not a little bit over, maybe 1 1/8 from the bottom of that female XLR to where that insulation is. Well, the issue that I run into is that the strain relief is not only going to pinch the outside insulation on the cable, but also some of that wiring there. So that's why you want to make sure it's just 3/4 of an inch when you start out. It's going to shrink a little bit, which is a good thing. It just gives more of that to capture on the cable. But as I'm looking at it, oftentimes you can just visualize and see, hey, a conductor came off, right? A solder joint, like this, should be very shiny. If it's dull like this, that means air pockets have gotten in there. It could be a number of different things that causes that. Sometimes just shaking when you're soldering can do it. However, if you see it kind of dull looking, it may probably work, but just realize after time, those air pockets will develop moisture and you'll get corrosion. And then you got lead singers flinging the microphone around, and goes that microphone for a souvenir. So, it's always just best to just take your time on this and speed will come. Now desoldering, right? I think it's relatively easy, but this is the big thing about the glasses here. Because when you go to desolder, of course you're going to put the connector into the jig, and you're going to take heat, and say this is the solder cup, right? And there's the top right there, the top portion, right there. This is the top right here. I want the conductor to sit down in the side of the solder cup, not down in the bottom of it, not down in the reservoir. That's a common mistake. We want it on the side there. So I'm going to take the tip of my iron, say my finger's the tip of my iron, I'm going to take that in and touch the sides of the solder cup as well as the conductor at the same time if I can. Right? The importance is to apply the heat, but the other thing too is that you're dealing with plastic connectors here, so you could singe those a little bit. Not the worst thing in the world, however, it can happen and you try to avoid it. Right? So now I take my iron, and the first one for me is always easiest. Right? The shield wire, just take it across the side of that conductor, and it does not take very long, usually. Right? See how that flicked, that little bit of solder there? That's why you wear those glasses. Right? I've had bad stories about that kind of stuff, and you want to avoid that, so safety first. But the other thing about that too is that I have this insulation to grab onto because that's just bare metal, and again, that could burn, ouch. You can also see on this connector here, right, that it's been touched with the hot soldering iron quite a few times. I put that out of my head. I'm just here to fix the connector now, right? So sometimes you got to overlook some things. Right? Same thing with the white wire, just heat it up and the heat transfers and that just pops right out. So you might have to pry it a little bit. Now when folks get really, really happy with solder and they fill up those solder cups, you could be there for a couple minutes. Right? That's when sometimes it's best just to throw the connector away and start with a new one. Right? That gets expensive though. So I'm just going to heat the red conductor as well and take that out. Right? That's done. Okay. So now, one of the issues I have is I have old solder on this connector right here. And it's basically, you can't reuse paint, you can't reuse super glue, right? You can't reuse solder. You can try, but it'll never stick, right? So I'm gonna have to get a little forceful with this. And what I mean by that is I'm gonna disconnect this block from my board right here. And I'm just going to take my soldering tip, put it on the inside of that cup, and it's a quick motion. You've got to do it fast, and I'm just going to whack this on the table real fast. And that removes any of the excess solder I have in there. Now there are things called solder wicks and solder suckers, and they work great if you're in a working environment like a shop. But in the case here, if I'm out in the field, I'm just going to whack that thing. Heat it up, give it a little whack like that. The same thing with this soldering cup right here. Right, just heat it up and give it a little whack, man, like that. Right. And that's again why I have this surface, so I can make a little mess on if I need to. Right. Right. Heat that up again. Right. I give it like about a 3 or 4 count. Just whack it. You'll never remove all the solder from in here, but you try your best to get rid of as much as possible. That's kind of what I have sticking right here, just a little bit. Right? Again, it's like trying to use old paint. That'll never work. So now, what wire goes where? Right? Well, with the XLR female that I'm going to show you right here, I've already discovered the back side of the connector. So what I like to do is make sure that that connector, and sometimes they do get stuck, so got to use your tools here. Right. Top of the connector's right there. I could actually print on this board right here. Of course, this is all gooped up, so I wouldn't be able to see it there. But I just make sure that the latch mechanism is at the very top, and then it's pin 1 over here, pin 2 over here, and pin 3 coming back at me on the bottom there. Okay? So I flip this around now, right, just for the camera purposes. So now I have pin number 1 over there, 2 over there, and 3 over there, and that's actually how you would have been seeing it, sitting in front of it. So the next step is to actually tin the inside of those solder cups. Now again, this is a messed up connector. But that's okay, man. We're just going to make it work. All right. get on with the show. So I'm going to heat up the solder cup and put just a little dab of solder on the side of the cup, not down at the bottom, just on the side. And then I take my iron and I tip it up like that, and that actually draws the solder up to the top. Same thing here, just heat it up a little bit of solder in that channel, in that cup, lift it up. That's all you got to do. And you see the flux doing its job as the catalyst to fuse the solder to the side of the cup as well. So once I get those three done, I'm kind of done with that solder now because of the fact I've already tinned the connector, I've tinned the conductors. Now I just have to place the wire leads in the solder cups and apply heat. So now I'm going to show you how to fuse the conductors to the connector here. I have my connector cups, these solder cups, tinned already on the sides, not down in the bottom, but on the sides. Again, a very important thing right there. More solder doesn't make a better connector, it makes a cold joint. Right? Then I put the conductor in there about 1/4 of an inch or so, apply the heat to the side of it, take the heat off, tug on it a little bit. Now the next portion here is that if I just try to put that white wire in the hole that represents number 3, oftentimes it'll poke out. So I'm going to bend it down a little bit, and you could use your needle nose if you want, your needle nose pliers here, just to bend it a little bit. And that way, this insulation will butt up against the top of that cup there. I'm not going to put it on the inside, not like this. Doesn't want to look like that. You want it to look like that. You want the conductor to fuse, not the plastic. And then I hold it steady as I can, bring my heat across the side of the conductor and the cup at the same time, and that's all the time it took. Tug on it a little bit, yeah, that's not coming apart. And then lastly, the red wire, same process. I just bend it a little bit. And now I can kind of use a little bit of leverage. So again, you're custom fitting this stuff. Right? Speed will come, make it perfect the first time. So that red insulation is now butted up against the top of that solder cup. Bring the iron in from the side, apply a little bit of heat. And I try to hit the conductor and the cup at the same time to allow that solder to fuse. And I tug on that too. If it comes apart, I fix it now. Right? And as soon as I pull this out, that's the big tug test there. And as you can see, inside the cup, that's fused well, it's shiny, fused well, it's shiny, fused well, it's shiny. That's what you're looking for. Right? And then I would reassemble the connector back, with the strain relief and stuff. I'd put all that in there. Of course, I'd make sure my cap is on there, right, initially. Thank goodness I didn't solder this other side. But again, that's something you have to pay attention to. Right? Put the strain relief on, you have the cap on there, you just put the shell on over it. Right? There it is. Right? Just slide that shell over it, it's all ready to go. Yeah? Right? You're ready to do a concert or a recording. Right? Slide that on there too. Right? Not only is this something that could save you money, to be honest, it makes you a more viable candidate in live audio, studio audio, broadcast audio. It makes you worth money and worth hiring. And folks will appreciate that. Right? So you want to practice this definitely. Right? And this is, there we go. Gotta thread it through there, draw that up, tighten it up. Now that plastic strain relief is pinching against that outside of that wire. I give it a little tug, let's have a concert. Right? The same process would be for an XLR male connector too. It's mirrored. So when you're looking at the backside of an XLR connector, a male XLR, right, the numbering is going to be exact opposite, right? So you do have to realize that, right? Again, as you saw that previous connector, it was kind of melted. I couldn't see the numbers next to the solder cups, but I can always see them next to the pins or the holes on the XLR. So again, they're going to be mirrored to each other, right? Kind of an opposite polarity thing, if you will. Anyway, so this is it's the same process, right? Strip the wire, tin it, right? Prep the connector, clean it out if you have to, right? Retin that, And again, now you got super glue on both surfaces, it'll fuse together. So the next type of cable I'm going to prep is for a 1/4 inch guitar cable or instrument cable, and you guitar players will definitely appreciate this. If you ever spent $40 on a 20-foot cable, fixing your own can save you a lot of money, and you can fix other people's too and just be a nice person, or you can charge them for it. And yes, I make extra money doing this. Right? It's real quick. Same thing, 3/4 of an inch between the button, right, and where I'm going to score through the outside insulation. And sometimes this cable is a little more pliable or rubbery, or as I like to say, you can cut through it like butter. Right? So you don't want to press down real hard. And the idea again is to expose the shield wire, right? Sometimes you got to break it apart a little bit. And I never go from that where I've scored through it. I never pull off from there because you'll nick the insulation on the other conductors. So that's why I go between the button and the score, pinch down, hold it with my 4 fingers, pop it off with my thumb. And now I have my one signal carrying conductor exposed, the red wire, and the shield wire. And just like with any of them, I'm going to separate the shield wire. It's important to go to chassis ground when you plug it in. I'm going to separate that, twist it all the way nice and tight. Right. And with the 1/4 inch connector, well, there's one less tab in there because it is a tip sleeve. It can only carry an unbalanced audio signal. Right. So that tab right there is for the tip, and the channel down here is for the sleeve connection, right? Or for the shield wire. So signal carrying conductor, shield. Right. Notice that there's a 1/4 of an inch separation there. So if I take my cable and bend it like that, that'll lay down nice and smooth within that connection point. But just like with the other one, I've got to look at this and make sure those wire leads aren't going to touch any other wire leads. So the importance of this always is to dry fit it, right? That works smarter, not harder thing comes into play a lot. So I'm going to trim back the red wire just a little bit, but the shield wire, maybe about 1/8 of an inch. Again, my red handled diagonal cutters. Right, get that junk. Just snip that off just a little bit. Make it look good. And just a little bit of that red wire too. Just cut it off. Right? Right. Now, the last step would be fitting this one more time and see, okay, where am I going to strip back the red insulation off that center conductor right there? And it happens to be about 1/4 of an inch. 1/4 of an inch to lay down on top of that tab. Right. Second hole down on these cutters, the second groove, and strip off 1/4 of an inch. Now again, I put a double knot on this because that wire lead, it did want to come out at that point in time. Right. And I'll show you a little trick at the end of this when we assemble it to the connector. Right. So you just try and hold it as steady as possible and pop that right off. Right. Twist the wires up again. And once again, that allows the solder to flow through the spiral evenly. Right. So now I want to show you how to tin the conductors. This is a really simple process here. However, heat and plastic do not get along. Right? So you have to be careful how long you leave the heat on there. So it's kind of a fluid motion. Will you make a mistake the first time you do it? Probably. Second time? Probably. But with a little bit of practice, you should be okay. Okay? So now I like to, again, take my solder here, just kind of poke it up a little bit. Right? That way I don't have to have my hands on it. Right? And again, I'm going to just heat the conductor. 1,000, 2,000, take it all down to the solder, and let it meld through all the strands of that conductor right there. Okay. And the same thing with the shield wire. I'm going to heat it up, take that down. Now this one, I tin this all the way back. The purpose of that is that I want that shield wire to lay down in that sleeve, and if I can get more wire on there, it creates a tighter bond or a stronger bond. Right? That way when you step on your cable, right, you've got a little more strength to hold it together aside from the strain relief tabs. Right? So that's that one. The next one I want to show you here is just doing a simple 1/4 inch tip sleeve connector. Right? And with these, oh my goodness, you're going to have to clean these off too. Right? So I'm just going to cut the connector off. right? And I leave a little bit of that insulation. That way I don't burn my fingers when I desolder the shield wire, because ow. And isn't that cool? I can flip this around and work on it this way. Some people will drill holes like this. I just like to be able to work from the top down and bottom up and be able to see my work and be able to get my iron in there without, burning up other components, protecting them. So I'm just going to take the tip of that iron and put it across here. Now this might take a second or two, but you see how that solder's flowing? It's like silver water in a sense, or mercury at room temperature. Right? I could even use a Terminator reference, the T1000, right? Melds into things. So that's all that is, right? Now the sleeve connection that has the shield wire on it, since this has a broader length of conductor attached, I might have to leave that heat on there or apply it in different spots. But as soon as I see it start running, right, I don't take the heat off. I keep it on there and I just discard the old stuff. And now my instinct usually is to grab the connector at this point, but it's hot. Use your needle nose pliers, right, if you want, or you could take the block off the Velcro. And so at this point, just like tinning, I'm just going to heat the tab right here, and I'm going to whack it on the table, just like I did on a 1/4-inch connector. So you watch for the solder to run, and it's flowing right now, right? Just whack it real quick, right? Now the little hole in here, you can use that if you want later on. I do like to expose it, but myself, I cover that up later, but other folks will tell you, put the wire through the hole. If that's what they tell you to do, you just do it, right? They feel it's a stronger connection, right? And then the sleeve connection here, I just heat this up. So that's just flowing like that. And there's a lot of solder on there, right? Again, you don't want to reuse this, and you'll never get it all off. So you just do your best. Right? Get the flow again, whack it off there, right? And that's clean. So now this is probably very hot. Yes, it is. It's burning my fingers. Ow. Right? So you might want to use your needle nose to do that. Right? Now, the process here, I've already tinned the cable, so now all I need to do is tin the connector, and I'm in business. Right? Super glue on each surface. Right? So now I'm going to heat this tab. Just a dab of solder on here. And this is really about getting more of the flux back on there, because there's still a ton of solder on here. Again, a lot of solder doesn't make a good joint. Right? It usually causes more problems. Now the sleeve connection here, I'm going to put a little pool of solder where I think that shield wire is going to land. In other words, where it'll lay down in there. Right? That's probably a good estimate. Right? And again, earlier I said I'm going to put a little bend in this, about 1/4 inch. So now that will just lay down nice and flat onto there, right? Onto that cable, onto this connector here. So I see the red wire. The insulation will butt up against the front of that tab, and the shield wire will lay down onto the sleeve connection here. But wait, Jim, there's a problem with that insulation. I got a trick for you, because you can do this on some cables. But you try to make sure that that's on the inside of those tabs. Right? So now, in the case here, I never want to singe that insulation on that red conductor, so I'm going to bend that out of the way. And it's kind of stiff right now, so it should stay out of my way for a little bit. And I'll take the cable, twist it around, and lay that shield wire. I'm not really too worried about what's going on here right now. I want to make sure that shield wire is laying down on that sleeve connection, and just apply the heat. Let the heat do the work. There it goes. It's starting to flow. There you go. All right. Now I'm holding my left hand steady. Right? And now I have a good amount of that solder that's actually flowing up over the conductor, and I can see it on either side of it too. And if you were to slice it, it should look like the omega symbol or the ohm symbol. Right? It's not too bad. Got a little poking out there. I can trim that. That's very hot. I can trim that there. That's not going to hurt anything. All right. And the last step on this is to take the conductor, and I need to lay this on top of that tab right there. So I'm going to bend it a little bit, right, to get the fit in there. Right? And then I'll use a little bit of leverage here. I'm going to pull up on this cable here. I'm going to use a little bit of that leverage to get that to stay under this tab. So yeah, you're going to fight it a little bit, right? Just take control of it, right? And I want that conductor to lay down, so I'm going to bend it. Right. Now it's laying down there, right? Take the heat, take it across the conductor. Boy, isn't that a common theme, huh? Let's let the heat do the work. It starts to flow, all right? There you go. And now I have solder on both sides of that conductor, right? It's relatively straight, that's fine. Right? That's pretty cool looking. I could dig that. However, some of that insulation, I need to get a little bit more on the inside of those tabs. So here's an old trick I learned, right? From a very wise person. Right? Just hold the cable like that, and if you push on the insulation, it draws that up into those tabs. And then the last step you would do, now I'm using regular straight needle nose pliers, but there are curved needle nose pliers that will actually are the size of these tabs, that when you pinch it together, it actually curves it into place. But that's all I'm doing, is pinching it down, right? Making sure that these little tabs do not bind up on the cap when I go to tighten it, right? And I give it a little tug, and I'm ready for my guitar player to have a concert too. So now, take the knot off. In this case, I got lucky. Right. I just slide this cap of this connector in there. Right? If it binds up, stop right there, right, and fix it. Sometimes that will bind up on the connector too, so you can, just a little bit, just bend it down a little. Get it out of the way. Right? You can only do that so many times before it'll break, but you know, it'll work like that. And slide that sucker on there, tighten that up. Now we're ready to have a show. Give it a little tug. Right? There are other things that we can do with that as well, things like heat shrink and stuff, but this is down and dirty, get it done now. Right? What I have in my hand here is a tip ring sleeve connector, right? Tip is always for positive, ring is for negative, and the shaft for the sleeve is always your shield wire. That's never going to change on any 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, or 1/16 inch connector. But the idea here is that this can carry a balanced audio signal, right, through the connector itself. It's just you're just changing the connector at this point, the connector size. So with that, again, just like with the taking apart the 1/4 inch connector, I have to spread these tabs apart. Right, allows me to gain access. You notice that when I cut this, I left some of the insulation on the conductors there. And that'll help when I go to desolder, because the shield wire will get very, very hot, and I'm not stupid. I'm going to grab it by the insulation there. So in prepping a cable for this, it's the same process, except you have to actually dry fit the connector within the cable itself and size it up a couple times before you actually start soldering all that preparation work. And what I can see here is I have my tip for the red, my ring for the white wire for the ring, and then I have the shield wire that will lay down in that channel right there. So I can see they're kind of even with each other. Not all connectors are like that, so you might have to fit the cable in there a couple times and cut the cable to length and then strip the insulation. This is one of the more tedious parts of doing this. However, doing 1 or 2, you get the idea. You take your time, and then you're ready to go. So here, I'm going to strip and prep this cable, this end of the cable. Again, it's just by twisting the cable around, slicing through the outside insulation to expose that shield wire. Now you notice here that between the butt end and the score, I kind of pinched down just like before, but you can also use that type of motion to break apart the insulation. There's no harm will happen with this. So just, again, hold with my 4 fingers, pop it off with my thumb like that. Separate the shield wire from everything else, and again, every little strand too as well. But twist that up nice and tight. Get rid of the string and the aluminum foil. Right. By just twisting it up real quick like that. And it just creates a good surface so you can cut them all at once quickly. Right. Yeah. Now, in looking at the connector, I size this up. I go, okay, that insulation needs to go on the inside of those tabs again for the strain relief. But my red and my white wire, boy, they need to be cut back a little bit. Right. They're poking out the connector already. And the shield wire as well, I'm going to trim that back as well. But you also notice on these tabs, they're about 1/4 inch long. Right? So I actually like to strip back just a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch, about 3/16 of an inch. You'll gain that skill of being able to what we call eyeball this, right, after a bit. And so I'm going to cut, I don't know, maybe about 1/4 of an inch off with the red and the white wire there. Right, just a little bit here. All right. And the same thing with that shield wire. I'm going to trim that back just a little bit too. All right. All right. Now with that said, separating these allows me to, again, strip the conductors. So this is where it becomes really handy to put that knot in the cable right there. Because if not, get it, you're going to pull those conductors straight out of that cable. And then you just have to start over. You don't have a choice. So that creates the friction to keep the conductors within the cable. And now I'll strip off about 3/16 of an inch. All right, same method here. Just put it in that second channel, that second groove, and strip it off. And then I size it up one more time. All right. Again, I like to twist these up tight, allow that solder to flow through. All right. Take a little look-see here. That's pretty good. I could trim those back. Well, that's pretty good. I'm going to trim that back a little bit more. Just take a little more insulation off. And now your custom fitting connectors. All right. Twist it up nice and tight again. And you bump it, twist it up again. It's going to happen. All right. Now there is a gap between these tabs here, and it's not much of one, but between the tabs and the sleeve connection right here. So I'm going to bend this conductor just a little bit, right, to kind of plan for that, realizing that eventually that's how it's going to look with inside the connector. That shield wire looks a little bit long, right? And this is honestly one of the more tedious connectors to do. Right? So just trim that off there, right? Make it look good. Right? The one for the XLR, I showed you tinning that. Right? I'm going to tin the other side that was for the TRS connector, right? Tip ring sleeve connector. And again, those come in different sizes. You've seen them for your headphone jacks, right? Your headphone connectors, but they're used in a lot of different ways. Same concept, heat the conductor, take it down to the solder. All right? You notice I'm not painting this on. I'm not going from here to here. That's never a good thing, right? Because when I go from there to there, all the flux burned off, and now it will no longer allow the solder to fuse the conductors. So just heat it up, take it down to the solder. Right? And sometimes some of that flux builds up. That's the purpose of that sponge. Right? Just get rid of it. The same thing on the shield wire. And this one is going to attach to a 1/4 inch connector. So that's going to lay down in that sleeve connector, that channel. So I'm going to tin this, you know, back as far as possible, you know, without getting ridiculous. Right? Right? That's prepped. That's prepped for an XLR. Right? I got the other one prepped. Oh my goodness! Now I just get the solder. The last one I'm going to show you, and this is oftentimes a little more complicated in a sense, because you're dealing with one extra conductor. So it's a little tighter fit when you're doing the wiring. That's the purpose of doing that preparation work, to get an eyeball or an idea of actually how that's got to live in there. Right? Don't fit in the one hole. I'm going to put it in the other one there too. Right? So again, just desoldering, it's real simple. You just heat the top of the tab in this case. Get that solder to flow like silver water or mercury at room temperature. And you can see who did this before. They did a really good job. That's hard in a sense to do. I should say it takes practice. And if you're a little ambidextrous, it doesn't hurt either. All right? Just kind of twist that out of place. All right? Because you're going to end up throwing that away anyhow. And then the same thing, heat the top of the shield. Let the solder do its work. And I keep that insulation there so I can grab the whole cable and not burn my fingers. All right. And this one's being a little stubborn, but that's okay. All right. We'll make it work. Because after a while, all that heat's going to transfer through all that and it slides right off. Now that was a little bit long of what they did previously. Right? Boo hiss. Right? We just fix it. Right? So since that was the last thing I heated, I still got some of that heat left. And again, you should probably use your needle nose pliers to do this. I'm going to whack this on the table. All right, see all that solder it got rid of? Cool. Get rid of the stuff on here on this tab. That's done. I just got my arm a little bit. Right. Probably why I don't have tattoos. Right. All right, so that's cleaned off. The idea is to just kind of straighten them out a little bit, the little tabs. Just like that. That's still hot. Very hot. Right? So now, since I've already prepped this portion of the cable, I fitted it to size, right? Cut it back to size and all. I don't have to deal with this at this point. All I really need to do is get a little bit of solder in these channels. And again, you can pretty this up a little bit, you know, make it look good. Right? Nobody's ever going to fault you for, you know, something like that. Right? So make it look straight, you know, like it was a brand new connector. Right? In all of this stuff, there's a point in time where you just can't reuse the connector either. Right? So now, just a little bit of pool solder on the top of this channel here. And I'm really just getting more of that flux, the catalyst for the solder, into that channel. I'm not filling it all the way up, right? And I'll get a little bit more on this top of this tab here. And I don't know if you noticed that, but I didn't even use the hole in these tabs right here. Some people again will, you know, want you to do that. That's, you know, you're just doing what they ask. That's your gig. But if you like it, do it. It's awesome. It'll work. All right. So now I just need to apply heat, aside from what's burning my fingers. I need to apply heat. So I need to get these wires out of the way and do that shield wire first, but I need to make sure also that the conductors, the insulation will butt up against the top of the tab. So this is why this is a little bit trickier. All right? So you got to fit it down in there. Black insulation in this case on the inside of the tabs. Lay down that shield wire, apply the heat across it, just like we do with any of them. At the same time you're hitting the metal of the connector. Get that solder flow, there it goes. Take the heat off, try and hold it steady as possible. Don't blow on it, doesn't do any good. Tug on it, might as well check to make sure it's going to work now. Then I twist the cable. And now, it's, in my opinion, it's a little bit easier to get that red wire in there. And again, tip of the iron across the conductor. Let the heat do the work. And again, you hear this little metal scraping sound. That's good. That means that the solder is flowing if you can't actually see it. You can hear that. And then twist this over to the side. Boy, I'm almost done with this one. Now that one you might have to manipulate a little bit with your needle nose, but again, you want the conductor to lay down onto the tab. What you're trying to avoid is burning up or peeling back any of the insulation on the conductors. So that's why you can't leave the heat on there a long period of time. You see that started, there it goes, it's just started flowing like that, right? Take the heat off, let it cool down, give it all a little tug, take my needle nose, and those curved nose needle nose pliers I was talking about, they're about $20. It's a little bit of an investment, but if you do this for a living or you're making money with your tools, get it. It's worth every penny, right? I have a little bit I could trim off on the inside, right? A little bit of that shield wire, it's poking up a little bit. And now that's custom fit. And you know what I have? I've got a TRS to XLR female adapter cable. And these are the kind of things that you carry with you in your career, right? Most facilities have them, live sound studio, but this is something you can carry with you. It's going to help you, right? Save the show. Now there's a common sense thing when repairing cables. And you have to think about what connector takes the most abuse, right? As you've noticed within the school here at Crass, that oftentimes you'll find this Velcro tie wrap, right, at the male XLR. Well, the idea behind this is when you take the tie wrap off, the Velcro tie wrap off, you're starting with the male XLR and you plug that into the patch panel or into the microphone input on your mixer or whatever it's accepting that connector there, right? Could be line level. But when you plug that in, that's the first thing you're plugging in. And then you just unroll the cable, right? So Most folks would think that takes the most amount of abuse. Well, it can, but as engineers, we're very careful about what we do. It's usually the end user is where the problems occur. So as I mentioned earlier about a singer swinging a microphone on the end of the cable, well, if that cable stops working, that's the first place I'm going to look, is on the female XLR, because you plug your microphone into that. Right? And one thing I can do, right, is just open the connector real quick and take a look. Right? But there's another device that we use in this industry, and it is a multimeter, right? And you guys will be familiar with how to check voltage with this. And there's other things, you know, current and resistance as well. But there's another setting that you really should get used to using. Some people call it the beeper function. It is an actual tone that will occur, all right, when I take this dial and I switch it all the way down to this point right here. It has a little sound looking thing, okay? It is within the actual ohms range, right? And it's usually the one that has the smallest setting, or lowest setting, I should say, right? And I'm just gonna see if it works right here. Hey, that's a good sound right there, that little beep. And so what I'll do with this, right, is find out what pin or what wire connected to the hole for the female XLR, right, is actually having an issue, right? So if I'm putting this into hole number 1, right, I'm going to go to the pin, these little numbers on the connector, right? If I go 1 to 1, hey, that's not 1. Ooh, there it is, that's working, that's cool, right? And I'll move either probe, it doesn't matter. I'll move the probe over to pin number 3, the bottom hole, right? Touch that, ooh, that's working right there, okay? But then I'll put it to number 2, right? And it's making sound. So I could say, okay, this cable's probably good. However, within that strain relief, again, the most abuse is right at this point right here. Within that strain relief, there could be a problem when you just move the cable back and forth. So it's a good idea when you're testing this to put it in the hole. And this gets a little tricky. Make the beep happen right there. Right? So you got to pin it against it. And just kind of move the connector around and see if it's what we call intermittent, or basically shorting out or creating an open circuit. Right? So we can see this cable's in great shape.